J-20 versus F-22. Or Su-57 versus F-22. J-20 versus Su-57 is probably not really relevant, but potentially. So I'm sort of bored by videos making this comparison, even because the vast majority doesn't have a clue of what they're talking about. You just compare the specs as if the exact specs were available and call it a day. But the question remains. I was puzzled by the fact that the solution chosen in different countries seem to diverge so much. I noticed this a few years ago. Many professional Western commentators looked at the Su-57 and they didn't know why the Russians had made choices that apparently didn't make sense. And the same commentators talked rubbish of the J-20, saying that it looked like a mockery of a stealth aircraft, criticizing its tail, canards, the avionics, and so on. Since I don't believe that people are stupid, particularly the aircraft designers, I had to solve this puzzle in a satisfactory way. And it took some time, to be honest, and it took the patience of reading long and boring books and long PDFs with few pictures and some math. I didn't have a clear haha moment, but one day, looking at the aircraft pictures, I realized I could see things that I couldn't see before. So, welcome, I am Gas, and you're watching Millennium 7. So, why the F-22, the J-20 and the Su-57 are so different? The F-22 is well known, so we won't go into much detail. In the early 80s, the United States Air Force considered the possibility that the F-15 could be matched and surpassed by the new generation of Soviet aircraft. In particular, the appearance of the Su-27 made these suspects well-grounded. In 1981, the ATF program was started, and after long and various vicissitudes, the F-22 was chosen as the F-15 replacement. The aircraft matured in the early 2000s. However, the early 2000s were also the time of the unipolar world. There was no major threat, so the production was cut short at 187 serial aircraft in 2012. Since the F-22 arrived first, it is still considered the benchmark for the fifth generation. The Su-57 and the J-20 measured themselves against the F-22, at least in some respects. The original ATF idea was to build a silver bullet, an aircraft that could defeat in combat any current and future machine that could be deployed by the Soviet Union. China at the time was not a factor. It is interesting to notice that this is, in practice, the same idea behind the current F-47. The Navy in these matters is generally more level-headed. No attention was devoted to the air-to-ground role, even if at a later time some air-to-ground guided weapons will be integrated as a secondary role. This result had to be achieved with a technological leap forward, where various enhancements, various technologies had to be combined to create something exceptional. Nothing could be more American. So, given this context, why the F-22 is designed like it is? The defining technology of the fifth generation is obviously stealth. The F-117 obtained excellent results in 1990 in Iraq. Its performance impressed so much that the United States Air Force decided that every combat aircraft had to be stealthy. The F-22 design is still considered the stealthiest among all fighters in service. The United States Air Force idea was to have an aircraft that was so hard to detect that it would always find the enemy first and shoot first. So the F-22 general configuration and construction follow the stealth requirement. The aircraft is also covered by a radar-absorbing material that is very effective but also very delicate and requires a lot of maintenance, which we have seen is okay for the Americans. Furthermore, not having to worry about enemy radars, the aircraft could fly very high and very fast. The aircraft ceiling, at least the declared one, is of about 20,000 meters, in line with many other fighters, but the F-22 can still maneuver at that height, while most other aircraft just fly straight. This is the reason why the F-22 has a relatively large wing and proportionally very large tail surfaces, which maintain authority even when the air density is low. The aircraft also flies fast. It can sustain supersonic speed without using afterburners, which is called supercruise, and this clearly reduces the overall fuel consumption for the mission. The supercruise speed of the F-22 is not officially known, but most analysts believe that it is around Mach 1.5. Flying high and fast gives the F-22 the ability to hurl AIM-120s with incredibly high energy, increasing the range and the no-escape zone by a non-negligible amount. Furthermore, since the Americans are Americans, the aircraft also had to be the best at within visual range combat and air combat maneuvers. In fact, the same lowish wing load, the large control surfaces, and the two-dimensional thrust vectoring are a good combination to maintain controllability at high angles of attack, which is the condition required for maneuvering effectively. Come on, it also features a cannon. And finally, the avionics. The aircraft radar, the AN/APG-77, was the best and most powerful that could fit in an aircraft at the time. The evolution has been very quick and now it is no longer at the top, but it is a very effective unit nonetheless. It also works in low probability of intercept modes, so it is very difficult to identify by electronic support measures. In practice, the aircraft was designed from top to bottom to be capable of seeing, but not to be seen. And this is the defining feature and the reason why the F-22 looks like the way it looks. Some say that the Soviets discovered stealth, but it is not true. The Soviet scientist Pyotr Ufimtsev published in 1962 a book where he presented analytical solutions to calculate reflections and diffractions of electromagnetic waves interacting with surfaces. It was freely published because it was considered just an academic work. What happened later in the Soviet Union is not entirely clear. Some say that the Soviets realized the idea of stealth but considered it unpractical. Others say that it was never considered at all. In a way or another, the American developments made clear that the technology was indeed relevant. The origin story of the Su-57 is long, complex and sad. The roots go back to the early 90s when the fundamental work for a successor of MiG-29 and Su-27 started in the Soviet Union. The most visible legacy of nearly a decade of studies is the MiG-144 technology demonstrator now parked in a museum. Contrary to what may seem, that project considers stealth very important and some original technologies, some original ideas were planned to be included. Then came the 90s, the lost decade of Russia, time when the ex-Soviet citizens had a taste of what they had desired for so long. In the early 2000s, it was clear that the Russian industry needed another advanced program to survive because more than a decade had been lost and the stagnation was evident for everyone to see. This is how the Su-57 came about as a fallback option from the ambitious program started in the last years of the Soviet Union, which is quite sad. The requirement, though, did not change. The aircraft was designed since the beginning to be a multi-role aircraft capable of covering all the roles from air superiority to ground attack. This is quite unusual for the Russians, but it is also a fundamental difference from the F-22 and the J-20, which are both born as uncompromising air superiority fighters. The Su-57 was supposed to be the only new aircraft entering service with the VKS in the 2010s, so it was supposed to do a bit of everything. And also being multi-role is good for export. At the same time, the F-22 was considered a benchmark to compare with. The Su-57 needed to have the capability of competing with the aircraft as good as the F-22 and come out on top, which was, and everybody agrees, a tall order. And finally, being a Russian aircraft, long unrefueled range was a must, and it had to be part of the Russian integrated air defenses. The resulting aircraft ended up being an aircraft with a high fuel fraction. The estimates are that in air-to-air configuration and supercruising, it has about twice the combat radius of the F-22. Furthermore, the attack mission required large weapon base, which in turn forced to adopt a large fuselage. This also allowed to keep the engine nacelles, while separated made the aircraft more resistant to damage. This also had the advantage of being an aerodynamically very efficient configuration, producing a lot of additional lift. The adoption of thrust vectoring and levcons make the aircraft extremely agile and incredibly resistant to spin departures, making it a great platform for air combat maneuvers and probably the most maneuverable combat jet ever built. I think that the Russians believe, like the Americans and the Chinese, that the time of dogfight as a way of acquiring air superiority is over. However, within visual range encounters may still happen, and you don't want to meet the occasional F-22 up close and be outturned, obviously. The aircraft style design doesn't appear to be as evident as in Western or Chinese designs, but the memory of the solutions implemented on the MiG-144 make me think that, as often happens, the Russians' way is different. I don't believe that the Su-57 has the same RCS as an F-18. I believe it is less, but it is obtained through different means. I discussed this in an old video. Please have a look when you are done with this. In any case, it is not as stealthy as an F-22, an F-35 or a J-20. But to deal with the opponent's stealth, the aircraft has been littered with sensors, some of them very innovative. For example, the L-band arrays in the wing leading edge can detect stealth aircraft at that distance. Even if they cannot produce weapon-grade tracks, they still give a picture of the tactical situation. Another interesting elements are the side-looking AESA arrays that allow the aircraft to go defensive and still guide weapons. I could go on, but I think this is enough to clarify why the Su-57 doesn't look like an F-22. It is because it is a Su-57. The F-22 would have been too short-ranged, too delicate, and too focused on air combat to take the same role as the Su-57 is supposed to take in the VKS. The Chinese historically placed great importance onto air defenses, fearing the destructive capability of American bombers. That was the lesson learned in Korea. However, falling out with the Soviet Union caused a severe technological delay for almost 2 decades. This started being recovered with the acquisition of flankers from the Soviet Union right before its dissolution, and after that, from Russia. Then the Chinese had 2 epiphanies. The first was the Gulf War of 1990 that ushered the modern age of American air power. The second was the F-22 entering service together with the realization that Russia did not have a competing program of equivalent capabilities. The Su-57 would be available for serial production in small numbers much later. So clearly something else than buying a foreign aircraft had to be done. The studies for a 5th-generation aircraft started in the mid-90s with theoretical studies of the technologies involved. The home of Chinese 5th generation is the 611th Institute in Chengdu, which works with Chengdu Aircraft Corporation. The story of the J-20 development is remarkably short. The aircraft flew for the first time at the beginning of 2011, with the first operational, not test, not experimental, operational units being formed in 2017. According to the J-20 chief designer Yang Wei, the project made extensive use of digital design, shortening the development time and reducing the necessity of modification during the test phase. For comparison, the F-22 took 8 years to go from the first flight to the first deliveries. The F-35 took 9 years, and at the time it was clearly immature for operational use. This short development time has made many Western analysts believe that the aircraft just looks like a 5th generation aircraft without having the features. Now we know that this is not the case. So why did the Chinese develop this aircraft? According to Chinese sources, which I trust more than Western pundits, the aircraft is a symmetric reply to the F-22. Its mission is air superiority on the waters of mainland China. It is not an interceptor, it is not a strike fighter, It is an air superiority fighter. And this is typical Chinese, planning for a symmetric and an asymmetric reply at the same time. The asymmetry in this case is the rocket force that can attack US bases and destroy the aircraft on the ground, but I'm digressing. After observing the United States Air Force at work and reading the US doctrinal documents, the Chinese expect that the US attack will take the form of an attempt of acquiring air superiority above the Chinese coastal regions and then proceed to the systematic destruction of Chinese combat potential and key civilian assets. The purpose being force a regime change in China or a fragmentation of the country, or both. While we wait for F-47, F/A-XX and CCAs, the job of air superiority will be in the hands of the F-22s, the F-35s to a lesser extent, and the Navy's F-18s EFs. The mission the J-20 was designed for is to confront these assets from beyond visual range with long-range weapons and impede the establishment of air superiority. Chinese doctrine has grown averse to within visual range engagements, which are believed to be no longer effective as a tactic to acquire air-to-air superiority. And as we have seen, this belief is shared with the Russians and the Americans, so everyone agrees on this point. Furthermore, China knows that the relatively short-range F-22s and F-18s would force them to rely on tankers, and these will become high-paying, non-stealthy targets that could be attacked at the maximum range of the air-to-air weapons. So, in this context, why the J-20 looks like this? China needs a long-range aircraft capable of operating on station at least 400 kilometers off the Chinese mainland or more. This moves the air battle above the sea, beyond or at the external margin of the ground-based air defenses. Furthermore, it is enough to put various US air-to-ground weapons well out of range of coastal targets. This requires a relatively big aircraft to carry abundant fuel, and in fact the J-20 is 21.2 meters long, while the F-22 is 15.7 meters long. Long endurance on station has also the interesting side effect of reducing the need for tankers, depriving the Americans of some high-paying targets on the Chinese sides. Both sides, though, will still be using AWACS, which are very high-paying targets as well, and both sides will go chasing them. It also needs to be fuel efficient while cruising, but still capable of maneuvering like a combat aircraft. If air combat maneuvers are obsolete as a tactic, this doesn't mean that within visual range combat will never happen. Furthermore, maneuvering well is useful to evade missiles. In this respect, the Chinese adopted a Delta Canard configuration, which is the most efficient and the best compromise. Understanding why is not very simple. I dedicated various videos to the subject many years ago. For the moment, just trust me. On top of this, the latest J-20 iteration introduces thrust vectoring nozzles, which further help with maneuverability. The J-20 is capable of supercruise, which is an important feature to give weapons additional energy and range, while avoiding the very high afterburner fuel consumption. This feature is comparatively more important for the J-20, since it is expected to operate mostly without tanker support. It features a large AESA radar array, one of the largest array ever mounted on a fighter, to detect stealth targets as far as possible. The number of modules in the J-20 nose radar is reported to be 2200, more than any other combat aircraft. Apparently, the radar has been continuously improved during the service life, and the original 24 kilowatt power is now higher, even thanks to the good electric power generation reserves. The aircraft might also feature side-looking arrays, but this is not confirmed. And obviously there is stealth, to delay the detection from the front and from the side, while the tails appear to be less stealthy. The latest engines, though, feature selective nozzle petals, improving this area too. And finally, the weapon bay is big, dimensioned to carry long-range weapons like the PL-15 that are considered kinematically superior to even the latest AIM-120 variants. It is possible that, like it happened with the F-22, some air-to-ground weapons will be integrated with the J-20 for a measure of versatility, but for now, the overwhelming focus seems to be on air superiority. And there you have it. These are the reasons why the F-22, the J-20, and the Su-57 look so different. It is not that China and Russia, which indeed arrived at the stealth technology after the United States, are not capable of doing what the United States is doing. Their requirements and their missions are simply different. The F-22 would be too short a range for Russia and China, too complex to maintain. The J-20 would not have satisfied the original F-22 specifications, and the Su-57 would not fit either in the American or the Chinese doctrine based on low observability. I just realized that I might have said this right at the beginning and saved an entire long video. Well, I had fun. I hope you had too.
大家好，我是主播林家远。生活压力大，失眠、浅眠是现代人常见的烦恼。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌现在进一步推出晚安加强版，添加天然GABA、色氨酸、茶氨酸、香蜂草4大天然草本，帮助睡眠的配方。选择太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌，做好日常保养，身体轻松无负担。每日克菲尔，时刻美好 ，Good Feel Good。请上快点购为健康下单，输入推荐码有额外折扣。太阳星全效克菲尔益生菌基础版、晚安加强版，新包装改版，内容不变，抽取更方便。要吃就吃最好的。